The silence out here wasn't empty. It was heavy. A physical weight that pressed against the hull of the Charon and seeped through the recycled air until it settled deep in your bones. It was the silence of forgotten places, of dead stars and gravitational voids that nav charts simply labeled as "Here be nothing." But there was something here. There was them. Elias Thorne stood not on a command bridge lined with polished chrome and barking officers, but in the ship's heart, a chamber they called the Archive. It was a chaotic library of stolen data, where server racks salvaged from derelict freighters stood bolted to the deck, their blinking lights casting a pale, restless blue across his face. He wasn't a captain. Not in any sense Earth Command would have recognized. He was an archivist, a keeper of ghosts. And this ship, this ugly, repurposed deep space salvage hauler, was his tomb and his weapon. The Charon wasn't a warship. It had no torpedo tubes, no kinetic cannons, no shimmering energy shields. Its only defense was a patchwork shell of semi-organic plating stripped from a leviathan that had died in the rings of a gas giant. A bizarre skin that absorbed and mimicked the ambient radiation of space. It made them a ghost to sensors, a cold spot in the void. But the mimicry was imperfect and came at a cost. The low-level radiation bled through the hull, a slow poison that gave the crew constant, splitting headaches and a metallic taste in their mouths, the price of invisibility. He ran a hand over a flickering console, the screen displaying the uncensored history of the Lyra colony, a world the hegemony had assimilated 60 years ago. He could see the original footage, the protests, the book burnings, the public executions of their poets and historians, all before the official records were rewritten to show a peaceful, voluntary integration. The hegemony didn't just conquer worlds, it curated them, trimming away the inconvenient truths of their culture and history until all that remained was a sterile, compliant franchise of the central authority. They didn't kill you. They erased you. And Elias Thorne remembered everything. 5 hours to insertion point. A voice crackled over the internal comm, calm but strained. Kyle, their pilot. He'd once flown luxury starliners across the core, navigating by the light of binary suns for the entertainment of hegemony elite. Now he flew a dying ship through cosmic graveyards, his only guide the faint gravitational tides he could feel in the ship's groaning frame. Elias keyed the comm. Status: Anya. The reply came from engineering, punctuated by the sharp hiss of a plasma conduit being sealed. The reactor is holding, which is another way of saying it hasn't melted through the floor yet. The chameleon shell is drawing more power than I'd like. It's getting hungry. We can't maintain this drift for much longer. Anya was the reason they were still alive. She could coax life out of dead technology with little more than scavenged parts and pure, undiluted spite. She saw the hegemony's pristine, efficient engineering as a personal insult, a challenge to her own chaotic genius. Elias looked back at the screen, at the faces of the dead Lyran poets. It just needs to hold long enough. Their target was a monument to the hegemony's quiet evil, the Archive Citadel on Xylos. It wasn't a military base, but a repository, a moon-sized fortress of data where the true histories of 100 conquered worlds were locked away, replaced by the sanitized versions fed to the galaxy. To the hegemony, it was the bedrock of their stability, the source code of their control. To Elias, it was the galaxy's largest mass grave. They had been drifting for 3 weeks. A cold, silent rock falling through the system, their life support running at whisper-thin levels, the crew of 12 moving like wraiths through the dim corridors. They weren't soldiers. They were the remnants of worlds the hegemony had broken: a botanist, a musician, a disgraced surgeon, all of them survivors who had lost everything but their memories. Elias had found them, one by one, in the shadows of the Outer Rim, bound by a shared refusal to forget. His own world, Cygnus X1's small colony of Viridia, had been a repository of pre-expansion knowledge, a planet of librarians and artists. The hegemony had come not with warships, but with bureaucrats. They hadn't dropped bombs. They had offered partnership and protection. Within a generation, their libraries were empty. Their language was a forbidden dialect, and their history was a footnote in a hegemony textbook. Elias had been a junior archivist then, and he had done the one thing forbidden by both his own people and the invaders he made copies. He had fled with a single encrypted data core, a seed of truth from a dead forest. Now, he intended to replant it on the citadel of Xylos. Prefect Valerius watched the star charts with an air of detached satisfaction. His office was a testament to minimalist power, a single obsidian desk overlooking a panoramic view of the docile, ordered space around his domain. Xylos was the quiet heart of the hegemony's intellectual empire, and he was its warden. A junior controller approached, his posture rigid with deference. "Sir, Sector Gamma reports a minor energy ghost, a cold pocket moving against the system's current. Analytics flag it as a sensor malfunction, likely a pocket of cryomethane." Valerius didn't even turn. "Stellar phenomena are not my concern. Controller, recalibrate the sensors and ensure the sector-wide historical digest is ready for broadcast on schedule. The citizens of the outer systems are due for their weekly reminder of the peace and prosperity the hegemony provides." The controller nodded and retreated, the anomaly already forgotten. Valerius prided himself on his command of information. He saw the galaxy not as a collection of peoples and places, but as a vast, intricate dataset. Rebellion, dissent, crime, they were all just errors in the code, anomalies to be isolated and corrected. The idea that a genuine threat could be anything other than a fleet of warships was, to him, a logical impossibility. The Charon shuddered as it passed through the last debris field, the chameleon shell flickering, causing a wave of nausea to ripple through the crew. "We're in the Citadel's shadow," Kale's voice whispered over the comm, "venting minimal heat. We look like a dead rock. Deployment team is ready." Elias made his way to the forward bay. It wasn't a hangar, it was a salvage claw repurposed into a launch tube. 3 figures stood ready in bulky, radiation-shielded EVA suits. They weren't an assault team. They carried no rifles. Their only tool was a 9-foot-long cylinder they called the Spike, a repurposed asteroid drill packed with the data core Elias had saved from Viridia, now weaponized with a viral code Anya had designed. The code wouldn't destroy the Citadel. It would hijack it. It would force the fortress to do the one thing it was built to prevent: tell the truth. Elias looked at the 3 of them, their faces hidden behind polarized visors. He knew their stories. A farmer from the Orion colonies whose world was forcibly terraformed, a linguist whose native tongue was outlawed, a programmer whose revolutionary AI was seized and lobotomized by the hegemony for being destabilizing. They were ghosts, too. He placed a hand on the lead suit's shoulder. "For the forgotten," he said, the traditional farewell of the Viridian archivists. "They will be remembered," the voice replied, tinny and distorted. The outer hatch hissed open, revealing the immense star-pocked curve of the citadel below. It was a perfect sphere of black metal and blinking lights, a monument to order and control. The salvage claw extended, holding the spike gently, and then released it. There was no fire, no explosion, just a silent push into the void. The spike tumbled slowly, inexorably, toward the surface. On the cairn, they waited. The silence was different now. It was the held breath before the thunderclap. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Anya's voice was a strained whisper. "It's through the outer defense grid. They're not even seeing it, reading it as a micro-meteorite." Kale kept the ship perfectly still, a single bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Elias watched the main viewer, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. The spike hit the surface with a barely perceptible puff of dust. Inside the citadel, a dozen automated systems registered the impact, classified it as harmless, and routed the report to a low-priority maintenance queue. For a full minute, nothing happened. Elias felt a cold dread begin to creep into his veins. Had it failed? Had they come all this way? Sacrificed so much for nothing? Then, a single light on Anya's console blinked from green to amber. "I'm in," she breathed. "The virus is unpacking. It's beautiful." Across the citadel, the machinery of lies began to turn on itself. In the Central Command hub, Prefect Valerius was interrupted by a flashing red alert on his desk. "What is this?" he demanded. "Report?" The junior controller was pale, his hands shaking as he tried to make sense of the cascading error messages. "Sir, I don't know. The broadcast network is activating. All of them. System-wide. We've lost control." The panoramic window of Valerius's office, usually displaying a serene star field, flickered and changed. An image appeared, the burning face of a Lyran poet, screaming defiance as hegemony enforcers dragged him away. The audio, raw and uncensored, boomed through the Citadel's internal speakers. Then the image switched. A village on Orion, its green fields being consumed by gray terraforming nanites. The desperate cries of the farmers audible over the hum of the machines. Another switch. The sacred texts of a forgotten religion being piled into a bonfire. Another. A child watching as her parents were taken away for teaching her their forbidden language. It wasn't just broadcasting inside the Citadel. Anya's virus had seized the hegemony's entire sector-wide network. On 100 worlds, in 1,000 cities, the official histories being broadcast on public view screens were suddenly replaced by the raw, bleeding truth. The quiet, orderly peace of the hegemony was shattered by the screams of its own victims. "Shut it down," Valerius roared, his composure finally cracking. "Cut the power. Do it now." But it was too late. The code was a hydra. For every node they severed, 2 more took its place, burrowing deeper into the network. For the first time, Prefect Valerius felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since childhood fear. It was the fear of chaos, of data he could not control. On the Charon, a cheer went up from the small crew, a ragged, desperate sound of triumph. "They're scrambling the fleet," Kale shouted over the noise. "The whole sector's lighting up. They see us now." The chameleon shell was failing, shedding its disguise as the ship's systems roared to life. Alarms blared across their bridge as they were painted by a dozen targeting scanners at once. The ghost had been seen. "Anya, full power to the engines," Elias commanded, his voice ringing with an authority he never knew he possessed. "Kyle, get us out of here, now." The Quran's engines, silent for weeks, ignited in a brilliant, defiant flare. The salvage vessel, never meant for speed, bucked and screamed as it tore away from the citadel, a single tiny spark fleeing a burning world of secrets. From his window, Valerius watched the insignificant ship flee. The raw fury on his face was cold and absolute. This was not a military attack. It was a philosophical one, an act of sacrilege. It had not broken his fortress, but it had poisoned his data, the very source of his power. He turned to his aide, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper that cut through the chaos. "I want that ship. I don't care what it costs. Scramble the Phantom Wing. I don't want it destroyed. I want its logs, its crew, its name. I want every trace of its existence hunted down, and then, when I have its memory in my hand, I will personally crush it, erase it, utterly." The Karen plunged into the darkness of a jump point, the stars smearing into streaks of light. They had won. They had made the galaxy remember. But as the silence of the void enveloped them once more, Elias Thorne knew this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new kind of war. A war not for territory, but for the soul of the galaxy itself. And now, the ghosts were hunting them. The jump tore them out of the fabric of space-time and spat them back into the void with the jarring violence of a bone being broken and reset. On the command deck of the Karen, the aftermath was a symphony of groans, both from the ship's tortured metal frame and its bruised crew. The transition had been a blind one, a desperate plunge into the unknown, with Kyle wrestling the navigation console like a man trying to tame a wild beast. The lights, which had flickered out during the jump, sputtered back to life, casting a sickly green emergency glow across the chamber. Elias pushed himself up from the floor, his head pounding in rhythm with the ship's wheezing life support. The metallic taste of the hull's radiation was stronger than ever, a coppery tang of slow death that served as a constant reminder of their fragile existence. Triumph was a fleeting, incandescent thing. Survival was a dull, persistent ache. "Damage report," he croaked, his voice raw. Anya's reply was a string of curses from the engineering channel, the audio interspersed with the crackle of electrical shorts. "The jump drive is fried, not damaged. Elias. I mean cooked. Like last meal on the gurney cooked. The chameleon shell's organic matrix is in shock. It's retracted back to its default state, a pockmarked, ugly gray. We're not a ghost anymore. We're a billboard. And the reactor. Don't even ask me about the reactor. Let's just say I'm having a very pointed conversation with it about the benefits of not going supernova today." The report was bleak, but it meant they were alive. He looked around the archive. Data slates had been thrown from their racks, and the air was hazy with the smoke of a burnt-out server. Lena, their botanist, was quietly picking up the scattered soil from a small tray of bioluminescent moss she cultivated in a corner, a tiny, stubborn patch of life in their sterile tomb. It was her own act of defiance, her way of remembering a world the hegemony had paved over. "Where are we?" Elias asked. Turning to the pilot's station, Kyle was slumped in his chair, his face bathed in the chaotic swirl of the forward viewer. The star charts were still resolving. but outside was a maelstrom of cosmic dust and shadowed debris. The Caliban Nebula, Kyle said without turning. The edge of it. Anyway, it's a ship killer. Gravitational shears, sensor ghosts, plasma storms. No one comes here unless they're desperate or insane. He paused, then added with a dry, humorless chuckle. Lucky for us, we're both. It was a temporary reprieve, a place to catch their breath and bleed. Anya's voice cut in again, sharper this time. Elias, you need to see this. On the main console, she patched through the feed she'd been pulling from the dregs of the hegemony network before the jump drive failed. It was a chaotic mosaic of signals from across the sector. The truth virus hadn't just been a broadcast, it had been a spark in a tinderbox. The screen showed footage from the industrial world of Corinth, workers in the orbital forges rioting, their faces illuminated by the fires of their own rebellion as they chanted the name of a Union leader executed a century ago. Another feed showed a public square on Cygnus Prime, where citizens were tearing down a statue of the hegemony's founder, their silent compliance shattered by the sudden, violent return of their own history. But it wasn't all righteous rebellion. There were images of mob justice, of hegemony collaborators being dragged from their homes. There were skirmishes between local security forces and newly emboldened resistance cells, the fighting disorganized and brutal. Elias watched a library burn not a hegemony archive, but a local one, set alight by a mob who now saw all information as a tool of their oppressors. He had unleashed the truth, but the truth was a wild thing, and it didn't distinguish between friend and foe. He had given them back their past, and they were choking on it. His reflection stared back at him from the dark screen, the face of a man who had used history as a weapon and was only now beginning to understand the shrapnel. They're not just fighting the hegemony, he murmured. They're fighting each other. That's what happens when you pull the stitches out of a century of wounds all at once, Kyle said grimly. They bleed everywhere. The chaos was their cover, but it was also their condemnation. They had made themselves the single greatest threat to the hegemony's philosophy of control, and the response, when it came, would be surgical and absolute. That response had a name. On the bridge of the IHNS Absence, Shadow 7 watched the same chaotic feeds, his face an unreadable mask of calm. The ships of the Phantom Wing were nothing like the bulky, utilitarian cruisers of the main fleet. They were sleek, matte black blades of engineering, designed not for battle but for excision. They were called nullifiers, and their purpose was to remove problems from existence with minimal fuss and maximum finality. Shadow 7 was a title, not a name, passed down to the commander of this ghost fleet. He was a product of the hegemony's most secretive programs, a man whose personal history had been as thoroughly scrubbed as that of any conquered world. He was pure function, a living instrument of erasure. Prefect Valerius is displeased, his second-in-command noted, his voice a deferential whisper. His displeasure is an irrelevant data point. Shadow 7 replied, his eyes never leaving the screens. The target broadcast a massive data burst just before their jump. They were sloppy, arrogant. They left an echo, a quantum resonance signature. He brought up a star chart, and a faint, shimmering trail appeared, leading from Xylos directly toward the Caliban Nebula. It was impossibly faint, a whisper that 99% of the hegemony's sensors would have missed. But the Phantoms were designed to hear whispers. They believe the nebula will hide them. Shadow 7 continued. a flicker of something almost like contempt in his voice. They think chaos is their shield. They fail to understand that chaos is simply a more complex set of variables. Plot an intercept course. We will enter the nebula from the coreward side. We will not hunt them. We will corner them. Aboard the Karun, the mood had soured from exhausted relief to gnawing tension. They were blind, adrift, and bleeding power. Their only hope for long-term survival was to reach a place Kyle knew of deep within the nebula, a lawless, free-floating scrapyard city known as the Tangle. It was a three-dimensional maze of lashed-together ship hulls, abandoned stations, and hollowed-out asteroids, home to smugglers, deserters, and other forgotten souls. It was a place where you could get a jump drive repaired, if you didn't get your throat slit for the parts first. But getting there required navigating the nebula's treacherous currents, and they had to do it quietly. "I can get the short-range thrusters online," Anya reported after 12 hours of frantic work. "It'll be like paddling a battleship with a canoe, but we can move. The problem is our heat signature. The reactor shielding is compromised. The moment we start moving, we'll glow like a torch in the dark." "Then we drift," Elias decided. "Kale, can you use the gravitational tides, ride them deeper into the nebula?" Kale studied his charts, his expression grim. "Maybe. It'll be slow. And if we hit a gravity shear, we'll be torn apart before we can even sound an alarm." It was their only choice. For 3 days, they fell through the Caliban Nebula. The view outside was terrifyingly beautiful, a swirling vortex of incandescent gas clouds, cosmic lightning, and the skeletal remains of ships that hadn't been as lucky. The sensor ghosts Kyle had mentioned were real, phantom signals that flickered on their screens like apparitions, forcing them to constantly second-guess if they were alone. The crew grew quiet, the strain wearing them down. The headaches from the hull radiation were getting worse, and their meager supply of painkillers was running low. The first sign of the phantoms was not a visual or a sensor reading. It was silence. Lena, tending to her moss, was the first to notice. "The comm chatter," she whispered, looking up. "The background noise from the pirate frequencies. It's gone." Kale's hands froze over his console. The nebula, for all its dangers, was never truly quiet. There were always the stray signals of smugglers and scavengers, a constant, low-level hum of illicit activity. Now, there was only static, a perfect, unnatural quiet. "They're jamming the whole sector," Kyle said, his voice dropping. "Professionally, this isn't a patrol." Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Anya, the chameleon shell. What would it take to get one last burst out of it? "A miracle in about half our remaining power," she shot back. "It might hold for 10 minutes. It might short out the second I activate it and leave us completely dead in the water." "Why?" "Because they're here," Elias said, pointing at the forward viewer. At the edge of a vast sight, purple gas cloud, 3 pinpricks of absolute blackness had appeared, blotting out the stars behind them. They weren't moving fast. They were drifting, sweeping. A wolf pack patiently cutting off the escape routes, the nullifiers. They hadn't come in loud and fast. They had come in quietly, methodically, poisoning the waterhole before revealing themselves. Anya didn't need any more convincing. Powering the Matrix now. Pray to whatever god you've got left. Elias. The Karen shuddered as energy was diverted. The lights dimmed until they were barely glowing filaments. On the outer hull, The semi-organic plates began to shimmer and shift, trying to mimic the swirling patterns of the nebula around them. The strain was immense. Alarms screamed in engineering as conduits overloaded. "It's not holding," Anya yelled. "The damage from the jump was too severe. We're flickering on the bridge of the absence." Shadow 7 watched the target appear and disappear on his tactical display. "They are desperate," he observed calmly. "They are bleeding energy. Do not fire. Let them exhaust themselves. Box them in. Move to convergence pattern delta." The 3 nullifiers began to move, their silent engines leaving no trail as they executed a perfect, tightening spiral. They weren't just ships, they were a single, coordinated predator. Inside the cairn, the situation was dire. The ship was a wounded animal, trying to play dead while the hunters circled closer. "They're forcing us toward the gravity shear," Kyle said, his hands flying across the navigation panel. "In 20 minutes, we either get torn apart by the tide, or we expose ourselves and they pick us off." "There has to be another way," Elias said, scanning the chaotic star chart. His eyes fell on a concentration of sensor ghosts, a particularly dense cluster of false readings caused by a pocket of metallic gas. "There," he said, his voice hardening. "Take us in there." "That's suicide," Kyle protested. "The readings in there are a nightmare. We won't be able to tell what's real until we hit it." "They won't either," Elias countered. "And they're expecting us to run from the danger, not into it. Anya, give me everything you have on the shell. A 1-minute burst. Kyle, as soon as we're inside that cloud, kill the engines. All of them. We go cold." It was a wild gamble, a bluff played with the last chips they had. Anya slammed her fist on a console, rerouting the last dregs of power. The ship lurched forward, plunging toward the chaotic heart of the gas cloud. The chameleon shell flared to life, a near-perfect mimicry for a few precious seconds. From the Phantom's perspective, the Kerrang seemed to dissolve into the nebula. And then, as the Karine crossed the threshold into the sensor-haunting metallic gas, Kale cut all power. The emergency lights died. The hum of the life support ceased. The entire ship went cold and dark and silent, adrift in a sea of ghosts. They were trapped, powerless, holding their breath in the dark, hoping the wolves would pass them by. On the bridge of the absence, the target vanished. Shadow 7 stared at the empty display for a long moment. "They have gone to ground," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "They are clever, but the clever mouse still dies in the patient trap. Deploy the resonance scanners. Sweep the cloud. It will take time." He settled back into his command chair. "We have nothing but time." The silence inside the Cherun was a living thing. It was the absolute, profound quiet of a tomb, broken only by the ragged sound of the crew's own breathing and the frantic, fearful beating of their hearts. They had been dark for 6 hours, a cold, dead piece of scrap metal drifting in a cloud of sensor-deceiving gas. Outside, the Phantom Wing's nullifiers circled like patient sharks, their resonance scanners sweeping the cloud in slow, methodical passes. The scans were a form of passive sonar, sending out quantum pings that would, eventually, differentiate the solid matter of their hull from the ethereal ghosts of the nebula. It was a race between their dwindling oxygen supply and the Phantom's inexhaustible patience. Elias floated in the zero gravity of the archive. A small emergency lamp strapped to his head, casting a tight beam of light on the faces of the crew gathered around him. They were pale, their features etched with exhaustion and fear, but in their eye he saw a stubborn, defiant spark. They were the forgotten, the erased, and they would not go quietly into the void. "They're hurting us," he said, his voice a low whisper that barely carried in the thin, recycled air. "They could have destroyed us at Xylos. They could have fired on us when we jumped. They didn't. They want something." "They want you." Anya's voice crackled over their short-range personal comms. She was tethered to a console in engineering, trying to coax a trickle of power from the dying reactor without creating a detectable heat signature. Valerius doesn't want a martyr, he wants a recantation. He wants the archivist who broke his system to stand before the galaxy and say it was all a lie. He wants to erase the truth by making the source of it erase himself. The cold logic of her words settled over them, a truth more chilling than the encroaching vacuum of space. This wasn't a military operation, it was an ideological one. The hegemony wasn't just trying to kill them, it was trying to unmake them. "So we give them a different story," Elias said, a new, dangerous idea beginning to form in his mind. He looked at the faces around him. Lena, the botanist, who could still name every extinct flower from her homeworld. Kyle, the pilot, who navigated by instinct and memory the others, each a living library of a lost culture. "They want the archivist fine, but we are all archivists. We are all the memory of what they tried to bury." The plan was insane, born of desperation and a profound, scholarly rage. They couldn't outrun the phantoms, and they couldn't outfight them. So, they would do what they did best. They would weaponize information. "Anya, I need a signal," Elias whispered. "Not a broad transmission. A single, tight beam burst. Something that looks like a distress call, but isn't." "A distress call to who?" Kale asked. "The only things in this nebula are us and them." "Not a distress call," Elias corrected, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "A ghost story. We've been hiding among ghosts. It's time we created one of our own." The target of his plan was the Tangle, the scrapyard city Kyle had spoken of. It was their only potential sanctuary, but it was also a viper's nest of competing factions, paranoia, and betrayal. A direct plea for help would be ignored, or worse, sold to the highest bidder. But a mystery, a legend whispered on the dark channels of the nebula that was currency. While Anya worked on rerouting the last of their comms power, Elias and the others went to work in the archive. They began to craft a data packet, a small, heavily encrypted file that would be embedded in the distress signal. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a fragmented narrative, a piece of a puzzle. They took the raw, uncensored footage from Xylos the riots, the burning libraries, the faces of the oppressed, and interwove it with something else: schematics. They were old, pre-hegemony designs Elias had stored in his original data core from Viridia. Blueprints for weapons, for advanced jump drives, for shielding technologies the hegemony had classified and suppressed for centuries, labeling them as destabilizing influences. They were the ghosts of a future the hegemony had stolen. They seeded the packet with keywords that would appeal to the inhabitants of the Tangle lost tech. Salvage coordinates, hegemony black site, pre-expansion treasure. They made it look like the last, desperate data dump of a treasure hunter's ship that had stumbled upon something vast and dangerous before being silenced. The final touch was the ship's designation. They didn't use their own. They created a new one. A name pulled from an ancient Earth myth. Elias had once read Orpheus, the poet who had journeyed into the underworld to retrieve a lost soul. "It's ready," Anya whispered after 2 hours of tense, silent work. "I can give you one burst, maybe 2 seconds long. I'm aiming it at the largest mass concentration in the tangle. With luck, someone will pick it up." "And the phantoms?" Lena asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They'll see it too," Elias admitted. "They'll see a distress call from a ghost ship and assume it's us. Getting desperate. They'll move to intercept the source. It'll draw them in." It was a piece of bait, and they were tying themselves to the hook. "Do it," he commanded. On the bridge of the absence, the signal appeared as a fleeting spike on the tactical display. Shadow 7's second-in-command leaned forward. "Sir, a tight beam transmission, originating from within the gas cloud. It's a standard pre-hegemony distress frequency. Encrypted, but the signature is weak, primitive." Shadow 7 observed the data for a long moment. It was exactly what he expected from a cornered, desperate crew. A final, futile cry for help. "They grow impatient," he said, a hint of something like satisfaction in his tone. "They reveal their position, triangulate the source. All ships converge on those coordinates. Maximum speed. I want a capture net deployed the moment we have a visual." The 3 nullifiers broke from their patient, sweeping search, and accelerated, plunging into the dense, sensor-haunting cloud like arrows shot at a phantom target. They were no longer hunting. They were closing for the kill. The Karen registered the sudden change in the Phantom's engine signatures. They took the bait. Kyle breathed, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead and floating away in the 0G. "They're moving fast. They'll be on top of the signal's origin point in 15 minutes. That's 15 more minutes of life than we had before." Anya grunted. "I'm rerouting the last of the power from the comms back to the short-range thrusters. We've got one push." "Where to?" "Elias." Elias looked at the tactical map, at the glowing icons of the 3 nullifiers converging on a point of empty space where their ghost signal had originated. And then he looked at the path they had cleared to get there. "Behind them," he said. "We use their own wake. They came in here quietly, but they're leaving loud and fast. Their engine trails will create a temporary corridor through the nebula's interference. We ride it out." It was an audacious, almost insane maneuver, like a mouse running up a cat's tail as the Phantom fleet raced toward the ghost of the Orpheus, the Karen, under the gentle, near silent push of its thrusters, slipped out of the gas cloud and into the turbulent, ionized corridor left behind by the nullifier's powerful engines. Deep within the tangle, the signal from the Orpheus did not go unnoticed. It was caught by a dozen different listening posts, its strange, fragmented contents quickly becoming the subject of frantic speculation in the dimly lit, smoke-filled den of a data broker known only as the Weaver. The decrypted file played out on a holographic display. The Weaver was a spider at the center of the tangle's web of information, a grotesque figure whose body was a tangle of cybernetic limbs and data cables. Her consciousness spread across a dozen different servers. She saw past the distress signal to the raw data beneath the schematics, the coordinates, the sheer, intoxicating value of it all. "Hegemony, Black Fleet," she rasped, her voice a synthesized hiss. "Lost technology. This is not a distress call. This is an auction, and the bidding has just begun." She began broadcasting the signal's contents, but not freely. She sent fragments to the leaders of the Tangle's most powerful factions, the ex-hegemony soldiers of the Rust Legion, the salvage cultists of the Cog Fathers, the Gene Pirates of the Chimera Collective. She gave each of them a different piece of the puzzle, just enough to ignite their greed and paranoia, ensuring that they would all converge on the source, all desperate to claim the prize for themselves. The Quran was flying on fumes and a prayer. They had cleared the gas cloud, but the nebula was still a minefield of gravitational tides and plasma streams. Kyle was fighting the ship every step of the way, his face a mask of concentration. "I'm picking up multiple contacts," he said suddenly, his voice tight. "Ahead of us. A lot of them. They're coming out of the Tangle. Fast." Elias looked at the screen. A swarm of ships was emerging from the scrapyard city, brutish, ugly vessels, cobbled together from the wrecks of 100 different designs. They were the scavengers, the pirates, the forgotten dregs of the galaxy, all drawn by the Weaver's call, all racing toward the source of the ghost signal, and they were heading directly for the Phantom Wing. From the Bridge of the Absence, Shadow 7 saw the approaching rabble with cold, analytical disdain. "Irrelevant," he stated. "Local pirates, drawn by the distress call. They are gnats. Deploy the interdictor field. Warn them off. If they do not comply, erase them." The lead nullifier projected a shimmering wall of energy, a "keep out" sign written in the language of overwhelming force. A system-wide warning was broadcast. "This is a restricted hegemony military zone. Withdraw immediately or be fired upon." The response from the pirate fleet was a cacophony of insults, threats, and, most importantly, a barrage of disorganized but enthusiastic weapons fire. They had seen the schematics. They believed a hegemony ghost fleet was hiding a treasure trove, and they were not about to be scared off by a warning. The battle that erupted in the heart of the Caliban Nebula was not one of tactics or strategy. It was one of pure, unadulterated chaos. The nullifiers, designed for stealth and surgical strikes, were suddenly swarmed by a hornet's nest of unpredictable, suicidal attackers. The Rust Legion boarded one of the Phantoms, their magnetic grappling lines slamming into its hull. The Cog Fathers fired massive, slow-moving junk cannons, filling the space with deadly debris. The Chimera Collective launched biological agents that ate through the nullifier's pristine black armor. Shadow 7, for the first time in his meticulously controlled existence, felt a flicker of something unfamiliar frustration. His perfect, ordered operation had devolved into a brawl, a messy, unpredictable variable he could not easily control. His ships were vastly superior, but they were being pecked to death by 1,000 crows. And in the midst of this beautiful, self-inflicted chaos, the Heron slipped past the battle, its damaged hull and flickering lights making it indistinguishable from the other pieces of junk in the pirate fleet. They were a ghost again, hiding in plain sight, a whisper lost in a hurricane of their own making. "We're through," Coyle said, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "The Tangle is dead ahead." Elias watched the firefight recede behind them, a silent, deadly fireworks display in the heart of the nebula. He had gambled that the greed of the Forgotten would be stronger than their fear of the hegemony. He had gambled right, but he also knew that he had just painted a target not only on the hegemony's back, but on his own. In the eyes of the Tangle, the ghost ship Orpheus was now a legend, a key to a treasure they would kill to possess. They had escaped the hunters, but they had just run straight into the monster's den. The tangle was not a place, it was a scar. A three-dimensional labyrinth of cosmic wreckage. It sprawled across the nebula's quiet heart like a cancerous reef. Hulls of forgotten dreadnoughts formed its skeletal structure, their empty hangar bays now serving as marketplaces. Docking arms from derelict colony ships were repurposed into bridges, and entire city blocks were housed within the hollowed-out engine casings of ancient freighters. It was a monument to entropy, held together by magnetic clamps, desperate bargains, and the sheer, stubborn refusal of its inhabitants to die. As the Quran limped into the tangle's outer fringes, the cacophony of the place washed over their comms, a tidal wave of noise after the profound silence of the nebula. It was a chaotic blend of a dozen languages, the shriek of grinding metal, the distorted thump of music from hidden cantinas, and the constant, paranoid chatter of 1,000 competing agendas. "Welcome to the land of ghosts," Kale muttered, his hands moving with a practiced delicacy as he navigated the treacherous, debris-choked corridors. "Everyone here is running from something. Most of them are running from themselves." He guided the Karen into a forgotten maintenance conduit, a dark, narrow passage in the underbelly of a massive, defunct ore processor they called the Boneyard. With a final, wrist-shuddering groan, the ship's magnetic grapples locked onto a rusted catwalk, and the engines fell silent. They were hidden, for now. One more piece of dead metal in a city made of it. But the silence on the bridge was heavier than ever. They had survived, but they were trapped. Elias gathered the small crew in the archive. The victory at Xylos felt like a lifetime ago. The rebellion they had sparked felt a galaxy away. Here, there was only the immediate, suffocating reality of their situation. "We need a jump drive," he stated. The words stark and simple. "And we need reactor components and a new chameleon matrix. We can't fight. We can't run. And we have nothing to trade." "We have the story," Lena said quietly, her gaze fixed on the flickering schematic of a pre-hegemony weapon they had included in their ghost transmission. "We have the Orpheus." Elias nodded slowly, a deep sense of unease settling in his gut. He was an archivist, a man who dealt in facts, in verifiable truths, but he had created a fiction so powerful it had taken on a life of its own, and now that fiction was their only currency. "Kyle," he said, turning to the pilot. "You know this place. Is there anyone we can trust?" Kyle let out a short, bitter laugh. "Trust in the tangle? No. But I know a man who values profit more than his own life, which makes him predictable. His name is Silas. He's a mechanic, a parts broker. He lives in the deepest, rustiest part of the Boneyard. If anyone can get us a drive, it's him. But he'll want a pound of flesh for it. Maybe two." Leaving Anya and the rest of the crew to maintain a low-power state and watch for trouble, Elias and Kale suited up, their bulky salvage gear making them indistinguishable from the other scavengers who haunted these metallic corridors. They stepped out onto the catwalk, and the tangle assaulted their senses. The air tasted of ozone and stale, recycled oxygen. The gravity was a patchwork of competing fields, shifting with every step and everywhere. There were eyes, figures lurking in shadowed alcoves, cybernetically enhanced faces peering from behind grimy viewports. They weren't just being watched, they were being assessed. their worth calculated in credits and salvage rights. Silas's workshop was a chaotic cathedral of junk. Pistons and drive coils hung from the ceiling like grotesque chandeliers. The floor was a treacherous landscape of half-disassembled engines and overflowing toolboxes. In the center of it all stood Silas himself, a wiry man with oil-stained hands and eyes that seemed to see right through the layers of deception everyone in the tangle wore like armor. He was hammering a stubborn piece of machinery into submission when they entered, and he didn't look up. "If you're here about the bounty, you're too late," he grunted, the hammer striking metal with a loud clang. "The Weaver's already put the word out. The whole tangle is buzzing about the ghost ship Orpheus and its hegemony treasure. Every faction from the Rust Legion to the Cogfathers is tearing the nebula apart looking for you." Elias exchanged a look with Kyle. Their bait had worked too well. "We're not here about the bounty," Elias said, his voice calm. "We're here for a jump drive, an old Cerberus-class core, if you have one." Silas finally stopped his hammering and turned, wiping his hands on an already filthy rag. He looked them up and down, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Of course you are," he said, his eyes lingering on Elias. "A ghost ship with a broken engine. The poet needs a new harp to sing his song. It's almost poetic." He gestured for them to follow him into a small, cluttered office at the back of the workshop. "I have what you need," he said, keying up an image of a jump drive on a cracked monitor. "But it's in a bonded warehouse controlled by the Rust Legion. And more importantly, I can't sell it to you. Not for credits. The moment word gets out that I helped the Orpheus, the Weaver will have my head on a pike." "Then what do you want?" Cale asked. "I want the legend to do what it does best," Silas said, leaning back in his chair. "The Rust Legion has a data vault in their stronghold, a place they call the Trophy Room. It's where their leader, Commander Valen, keeps his leverage, financial records, blackmail on other faction leaders, including me. He's been squeezing me for months." He looked directly at Elias. "You're a ghost, a thief of secrets. The story says you slipped into the hegemony's most secure archive. Getting into the trophy room should be child's play for you. Wipe my file, and the jump drive is yours. I'll even create a clean exit corridor for you." It was a suicide mission disguised as a simple transaction. The Rust Legion was the most brutally efficient military force in the Tangle, composed of disgraced hegemony soldiers who ran their territory with an iron fist. But they had no other choice. "We'll do it," Elias said, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. Meanwhile, in the cold, silent void beyond the Tangle, Shadow 7 had adapted. The chaos of the pirate attack had been an unexpected variable, but it had also been informative. He now understood that his target was not just a ship, it was an idea. And ideas could not be destroyed with torpedoes. They had to be poisoned at the source. He opened a secure channel, a ghost line that bypassed all hegemony protocols. His signal found its way to the center of the Tangle's web, to the data den of the Weaver. Her holographic avatar flickered into existence before him, a distorted, multi-limbed figure of pure information. "Shadow 7, her synthesized voice hissed. "A rare honor. I assume you are interested in the bounty I have placed." "The bounty is irrelevant," Shadow 7 replied, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "You seek information. I possess the ultimate source. I am offering you a partnership." The Weaver was silent for a moment, the digital equivalent of a raised eyebrow. The hegemony does not partner with anomalies like myself. The hegemony is a blunt instrument, Shadow 7 stated. I am not. You want to control the flow of information in this sector. I can give you access to hegemony back channels, surveillance logs, economic data you can only dream of. I can make you a queen. And in return, the Weaver asked, the greed palpable even in her synthesized voice. You will find the ship that calls itself the Orpheus, Shadow 7 commanded. You will not engage it. You will not alert your factions. You will simply give me its precise location. I will handle the rest. The Weaver's avatar seemed to shimmer with pleasure. She was being offered the keys to a kingdom. The fate of one small, broken ship was a small price to pay. Consider it done, she rasped, and the connection went dead. The trap was now being set from both the inside and the outside. Back on the Karen, the crew listened as Elias laid out the plan. It was a heist, a delicate operation of infiltration and data theft in the heart of a heavily armed military compound. Lena would use her knowledge of botany to synthesize a mild neurotoxin from her bioluminescent moss, a gas that would cause temporary confusion and memory loss when introduced into the trophy room's ventilation system. Kyle would use his knowledge of the Tangle's underbelly to guide them through the maintenance tunnels. Anya would work on cracking the vault's electronic defenses from the ship. And Elias, he would be the one to walk in. He had to play the part of the myth, the ghost who could walk through walls. As they prepared, he retreated to the archive, the ship's silent, beating heart. He stood before the flickering screen that still showed the history of his own lost world, of Viridia. He had started this journey to preserve the truth, to fight the hegemony's lies with the pure, unassailable power of fact. But now he was neck-deep in his own deceptions. He was using a lie to buy his freedom, perpetuating a myth to survive. He was becoming the very thing he fought against, a manipulator of narratives. He looked at the faces of the Viridian poets on the screen, their expressions a silent judgment. Was he honoring their memory, or was he betraying it? He didn't know the answer. All he knew was that if they didn't survive, none of the truths they carried would matter. The legend of the Orpheus was a heavy, suffocating cloak, but it was the only thing keeping them from the cold. He straightened his shoulders, his expression hardening. If he had to be a ghost, he would be the most convincing one the galaxy had ever seen. He would haunt them all. The underbelly of the Rust Legion's stronghold was a maze of cold, sweating pipes and groaning support beams. A perfect reflection of the hegemony's forgotten infrastructure from which it was built. Kale moved through the darkness with silent, confident grace of a man who had spent a lifetime navigating places he wasn't supposed to be. Elias followed, his heart a cold, heavy drum in his chest, the weight of the fabricated legend of the Orpheus pressing down on him like a physical shroud. Through their comms, Anya's voice was a steady, reassuring whisper, a lifeline of logic in a sea of visceral fear as she guided them through the layers of electronic security. "Ventilation shaft coming up on your left," she murmured. "Lena, you're on. Give them something to forget." Lena, positioned at a junction box 2 levels above, carefully released the contents of the small canister she held. The colorless, odorless gas synthesized from her bioluminescent moss hissed into the vent, a silent, organic ghost sent to haunt the memories of their enemies. They gave it 10 minutes. 10 agonizingly long minutes in the suffocating darkness. before Anya gave the all-clear. "The guards in the control sector are reporting mild disorientation," she said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. "Life signs are stable, but short-term memory is fuzzy. The door to the trophy room is unlocked. You have a window. Elias, go," leaving Kyle as a lookout. Elias slipped through the final access hatch and into the trophy room. The name was a lie. It wasn't a room, it was a sanctuary of sorrow. The chamber was circular, dimly lit, and cold. Glass cases lined the walls, but they didn't hold medals or weapons. They held artifacts from dead worlds. A child's wooden toy from the Lyra colony. A hand-carved flute from the forest moon of Endara. A single, perfectly preserved crimson flower from a planet whose name Elias didn't even recognize, floating in a stasis field. And in the center of the room, on a stark metal pedestal, was a hegemony commander's dress uniform, immaculate and pristine. This wasn't a vault of blackmail, it was a mausoleum. This was Commander Valen's private archive of the worlds he himself had helped the hegemony erase. Elias moved to the central console, his hands shaking not with fear, but with a profound, soul-shaking rage. This man wasn't just a brute, he was a collector of ghosts, a curator of his own atrocities. He found Silas's file easily, a simple blackmail ledger, but next to it was another file, one that wasn't meant for anyone else's eyes. Valen, C. Personal log. Classified. He opened it. The screen filled with Volan's own words, detailing his career, his disillusionment, his self-loathing. He had been the officer in charge of the final pacification of Lena's homeworld, the one who gave the order to deploy the sterilizing agents that had turned her world's vibrant flora into gray dust. The trophy room wasn't about leverage, it was about penance. A private hell where Valen surrounded himself with the evidence of his own damnation. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said from the doorway. Elias spun around, his hand instinctively going for a weapon he didn't have. Commander Valen stood there, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face like a cratered moon. He wasn't wearing armor, just a simple gray tunic. His eyes were not angry, but filled with a deep, weary sadness. Lena's gas had clearly not affected him. "The price of order," Valen continued, his gaze drifting over the artifacts. "Every piece in here is a sin I committed in the name of peace. I know who you are. The archivist from Xylos. You think you're so different from them. You use information to burn worlds, just like they do." Before Elias could answer, the entire stronghold shuddered. A shrill, piercing alarm blared through the corridors, and the room was bathed in flashing red emergency lights. "We've been made," Kyle's voice yelled over the comm. "It's not the Legion Anya." "What is it?" Anya's reply was strained, laced with disbelief. "It's the Phantoms. 3 nullifiers just dropped out of the nebula on top of us. They're here. The Weaver sold us out." The trap had snapped shut. They were caught between the fury of the Rust Legion and the cold, surgical precision of the Phantom Wing. Valen's sad eyes hardened. "It seems your ghosts have followed you," he said, drawing a heavy plasma pistol from his belt. "This ends now." But Elias wasn't looking at Valen. He was looking at the console, at the commander's personal log, and in that moment, the weight of his own lies, the burden of the Orpheus myth, it all fell away, replaced by a terrible, clarifying certainty. He wasn't here to steal a file. He was here to tell a truth. He ignored the pistol leveled at his chest, and his fingers flew across the console, not deleting Silas's file, but rerouting the entire contents of the trophy room's server. "What are you doing?" Valen snarled. "I'm not a myth," Elias said, his voice ringing with a newfound power. "I am an archivist, and I am declassifying your history." He slammed his fist on the broadcast key. Across the tangle, on every screen, in every cantina, workshop, and bridge, the feed from the Weaver was suddenly hijacked. But it wasn't the schematics of the Orpheus that appeared. It was Commander Valen's personal log, his own words, his own reports, detailing the atrocities he had committed for the hegemony. The footage of Lena's world dying, the names of the dead, the orders he had followed without question. Elias had turned Valen's private confessional into a public testimony. The Rust Legion, a faction built on the myth of a noble rebellion against hegemony tyranny, was suddenly confronted with the truth that their leader was one of its most prolific butchers. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The Legion's internal comms exploded in a firestorm of confusion, anger, and betrayal. Valen stared at the screen, his face ashen as his most private shames were laid bare for the entire city to see. The pistol in his hand wavered. His authority, his carefully constructed identity, had been shattered in a single broadcast. That was the moment Kale struck, darting from the shadows to disarm the stunned commander. The chaos was their cover. As civil war began to erupt within the Rust Legion's own ranks, Silas's voice crackled over their comms. "I don't know what you just did, poet, but the whole damn city is on fire. Your jump drive is waiting in Base 7. Go. I've opened a path." The escape from the stronghold was a blur of smoke, shouting, and sporadic firefights. They made it back to the Haran as the tangle tore itself apart. Anya was already working frantically, guiding the new jump drive into its housing with the ship's own salvage arms. "The nullifiers are closing in," she yelled. "They're cutting through the chaos. We have maybe 3 minutes." As the final connections were made, the sleek, black form of the HNS Absence slid out of the debris field, its weapon ports glowing with malevolent energy. They were out of time. "We're not going to make it," Kyle said, his hands tight on the controls. "Open a channel," Elias commanded, his gaze locked on the enemy ship. Directly to him. Audio only. He knew Shadow 7 was listening. He didn't have a weapon that could scratch the nullifier's hull, but he had one last story to tell. "Shadow 7, he said, his voice calm and clear, echoing on the silent bridge of the Absence. "I know what you are. You're a ghost, just like me. The hegemony took your name, your history, your world, and they replaced it with a number and a function. They made you their perfect weapon, a man with no past to regret and no future to desire." He paused, letting the words sink in. "My world was Viridia. We kept books. We remembered names. Before the hegemony burned our libraries, I read a story about a man who was so good at his job that he forgot his own face. Tell me, Shadow 7, when you look in the mirror, whose face do you see?" On the bridge of the Absence, Shadow 7 stood motionless. Elias's words were not a threat. They were a virus, a piece of rogue data invading the perfect, cold logic of his mind. Irrelevant data point. His training screamed. But for the first time, a question bloomed in the void of his erased past. Who was I? The question caused a flicker, a nanosecond of hesitation in the ship's firing solution. It was all Kale needed. Now, he yelled, slamming the jump drive controls. The Charon's new heart roared to life, and with a gut-wrenching lurch, it tore a hole in space and vanished. Shadow 7 was left alone, surrounded by the beautiful, silent chaos of a burning city. He had failed. The archivist was gone. He looked at his own reflection in the dark, polished obsidian of the forward view screen, and for the first time, he saw not a function, but a stranger. The Charon drifted in the deep, silent space between galaxies, its crew battered, bruised, but whole. They had the drive. They were free. But they were no longer just running. The truth Elias had unleashed in the tangle had not only saved them, it had changed them. They were not just the keepers of old memories anymore. They were the creators of new ones. Elias stood in the archive, the blue light of the servers casting a gentle glow on his face. The legend of the Orpheus was dead, but the story of the Charon was just beginning. It would be a story whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy, a story not of lost treasure, but of a truth that could not be buried. They were no longer ghosts, haunted by the past. They were the haunting itself, a constant, living reminder to the galaxy and to the hegemony that you cannot erase an idea. You cannot kill a memory, and some truths, once spoken, can never be silenced again.